geared towards the adults are already restrictive to a certain class of people that can afford such an education. So the final point I want to raise about the kinds of institutional structures that can support social and emotional learning in this way that I've described is to make sure that finances aren't an obstacle to anyone's participation. And to achieve that, the Institute has created a need-blind admissions model for oral and seminars. What that means is that any member who's interested is accepted regardless of their ability to pay. Their acceptance is based on their demonstrated passion and interest in the seminar itself. And therefore, we support members as much as we can financially, and that includes offering scholarships that vary between 50% of the course fees to the entirety of the course fees, in addition to travel reimbursements, to make sure that finances are not an obstacle to anyone. And so these are three elements of institutional support that I wanted to mention and foreground in how we can achieve a learning environment that supports the social and emotional capacities for members involved. And from there, I'll switch to the second part, which is about the form or the pedagogy employed in the Institute to achieve social and emotional learning. I briefly described earlier the way in which posing a question that's the answer to which is premised on an individual experience is one pedagogical strategy. It defies and bypasses the ways in which we've been trained to define according to highly regulated frameworks in academia. But there are a variety of other pedagogical strategies that we deploy. The first is the form of the seminar itself. The seminar is an occasion for people to reflect and share and think without them being as part of a hierarchy in which the facilitator or the lecturer gives information in a clear-cut fashion. And each question posed in the seminar at the beginning is an opportunity for each member to take ownership of the meaning and direction of the seminar, and therefore to navigate it in their own terms. And that takes place throughout each discussion when each member of the seminar is invited to reflect on the given text. It could be a literary text, a philosophical text, a historical text, and regardless of this text's difficulty, and sometimes we engage with very difficult philosophical texts or works in Arabic whose history and whose contextual framework might be far removed from our own, but that difficulty creates sites that are refreshing for us to reflect on and allow each member to develop their own orientation, their own reading method, their own interpretive capacity in order to make sense of the text. And towards the end of each seminar, there is an entire session dedicated towards how the course itself was able to transform the member. And therefore, each member is invited to present an act of transformation that they've underwent. And that could take the form of an object that they share, something they've written or created or artistically produced, or it could be sharing an experience. So all these moments in which the member of the seminar feels like they are co-owners of the space, of the learning environment, of the direction of the themes unfolding, allows them to grow socially and emotionally, given the diversity in the classroom and given the difficulties that are necessary in achieving understanding of a very difficult text. So that's by way of form. And finally, content. What kind of curricular program, what kind of resources, what kind of content do we deploy in order to achieve these ends? At a primary level, the existence of the Institute in the Arab Islamic world, and Jordan specifically, necessitates that we turn to Arab Islamic resources for our curriculum. And what that means is not relying on often imported Western curricular resources that exist in varying forms throughout the world, but rather really excavating the history of the Arab Islamic sciences, including the history of philology, sociology, philosophy, theology, all these different sciences that have developed complex modes of understanding the human experience, some of which speak directly to the crises in political and social terms that we face today. So when you give a group of adult members of society who represent a diverse array of backgrounds the chance to engage with the history that stems from their own context, you allow them the chance to engage both socially and emotionally with what it means to produce and read and discuss knowledge that stems from your own background. Again, it bypasses some of the rigidity, some of the asocial, some of the a-emotional ways in which we have been trained or conditioned to understand knowledge and its production. In today's society, especially with the foregrounding of STEM as necessary fields for advancing in economic terms, for achieving a stable job, it's easy for us to think of knowledge as abstract, as impersonal, as being far removed from our own experiences in everyday life. But the moment you offer resources in a critical fashion, in a holistic fashion, that stem from your own context, then you're able to engage so much more holistically with your own self and your own emotional and social responses to these kinds of texts. And that really expands and empowers each individual member's capacity to see themselves not only as capable of speaking eloquently and powerfully about the human condition that takes into account their own social and emotional complexity, but it also makes them agents of change. They become more empowered to deploy knowledge, not as an abstract category to be replicated for a specific instrumental end, which is how often we understand knowledge in universities and in various STEM-oriented training, but rather as opportunities for us to transform our understanding of ourselves and subsequently to transform our understanding of society. And so between the institutional structure that I've described, the form or the pedagogical strategies we deploy at the Institute, and finally the curricular resources, I've tried to paint a picture of how social and emotional learning might be advanced, not through specific tactics that reify or take society or emotions as independent of knowledge and its production, but rather as deeply entwined in the kinds of institutions and the kinds of pedagogies and in the kind of curricular resources that are available to us. And I take that as a call to not only expand and multiply the number of ways in which this kind of institutional, curricular, and pedagogical strategies might be developed in the Arab Islamic world, but also as a call for other global South contexts, and indeed for also global North contexts, to reflect on the specific traditions that they deploy. And one element that I want to highlight, and I'll briefly conclude, is that within the West, there are also a multiplicity of traditions, a multiplicity of institutional structures, a multiplicity of pedagogies. And often what we can do is we can excavate them, especially from minority communities, those that aren't necessarily represented in a dominant or hegemonic discourse of Western academia. And the one tradition that I've been informed by and that I bring forth into the Institute, especially when it comes to comparative seminars, is the African American tradition. So within the West, there are multiplicities that we can engage and excavate from. And within the global South, certainly, there are a variety of traditions. And my final remark is to say that when I describe the Arab Islamic context, I'm not necessarily reifying a specific kind of essentialist identity. It's not about taking the Arab as an essence or Islam as an essence. It's rather trying to figure out how an enormous amount of history has produced civilizational inheritances that can be meaningful not only to Arabs and Muslims, but also to Arab Christians, to Arab Jews, to people who engage with knowledge production on the basis of multiple modalities of how we can understand it. And in that respect, the seminars have always engaged in an ecumenical frame with Christians, Jews, non-believers coming together to learn from this rich tradition. And that has really allowed us to develop an incredible sense of community, not on the basis of a single essence or a single commonality, but precisely because we come from diverse backgrounds and are able to speak to each other and learn from each other in this holistic manner. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share, and I look forward to any questions, should any members have them.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah Awad, for this insightful presentation. We're going to move to Dr. Hae Kyung Park, and then we'll ask the questions towards the end of Dr. Hyun Park's presentation before we move on to the last presentation of this first session. Dr. Hyun Park,
okay,
are you able to share your screen? I will.
Yes.
Okay, so let me just
this.
introduce you while you're able to share your screen. Dr. Hyun Park is a doctoral candidate in the School of Psychology program at the University of Massachusetts. She completed her EDM in Prevention Science and Practice at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and also received an MA in International Educational Development from Columbia University. Her international experiences of working at UNESCO and being involved in several cell projects at the Harvard EASL lab led her to develop research interest in the development, implementation, and assessment of culturally responsive social emotional learning interventions. The presentation today that she will be sharing will focus on the experiences of developing a culturally responsive cell program that fits into the Korean education context. 20 first grade students from an urban area in Korea participated in a pilot program called Emotion Coding. Through this case study, she will introduce the cell program implementation process, preliminary results on student outcomes and challenges. Dr. Hyun Park, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good to see you. Well, good to present here. Thank you so much for hosting. And before I begin, I want to send my deep condolence to those families and people who lost their loved ones because of the recent tragedy incident happened in Morocco due to the earthquake. Okay, so today I wanted to share with you of our experience of developing a social emotional learning program for the South Korean students. And this experience will be informative if you're especially in a country where you're just initiating this SEL, where you're really starting from scratch to really build the community to implement the SEL program in the public education setting. So before I begin, I wanted to briefly start with this video, and just to give you a heads up, the contents may include some of the suicidal topics. It'll be really short. Let me skip the ad.
Dr. Park, if you can allow this sound, enable the sound.
You can't. Can you not hear the sound?
No.
No. Let me share my screen again. Sometimes you have to.
You could share directly the video, and we should be able to.
Okay. Share sounds. There it is. Okay. Because we're, this is an international conference, I wanted to give you some of the backgrounds of the South Korea. So this will be limited.
Where thousands of teachers.
Yeah.
Well, let's leave Ukraine now and head to South Korea, where thousands of teachers are going on strike and attending a mass rally to honour colleagues who have taken their own lives. School staff are demanding better protection against bullying by the parents of pupils after a young teacher died by suicide in July. Well, let's go live now to Seoul, where our correspondent Jean McKenzie is. And Jean, it looks like you are at a protest at a rally. What is happening where you are?
Yes, this is now the 7th week that teachers here in Seoul have been protesting. Well, actually, across South Korea, they've been coming here to protest every single weekend, and it has culminated today in this national strike of teachers. At the weekend, we saw 100,000 teachers take to the streets, and this all started with the death of a young teacher, a 23-year-old, back in July. Now, the young teacher died by suicide, and it emerged after her death that she had been suffering with pressure from work, but that she had also been dealing with complaints from parents. And what this did here has opened this Pandora's box, really, where teachers all across the country have started sharing their own stories about how they are frequently harassed by teachers here who call them all hours of the day on their mobile phones and at weekends, complaining. Essentially, they say that these are overbearing parents who are just completely fixated on their children's success at school. And, look, some of these complaints are serious that teachers are having to deal with. The teachers say that they can be accused of child abuse if they try to restrain violent children or if they try to send children out of the class. And they can be accused of emotional abuse if they just tell children off. So they say that it's reached the point where they don't even feel safe to teach or discipline their children.
You just mentioned there that there have been a number taking place. This is a larger one. Is there any sign that these teachers are being listened to? The government, schools are listening to them?
The government is listening, and it has said, look, we hear your cries. They have actually announced a whole range of new measures to try and protect teachers better. They brought in new guidelines just a couple of days ago, which should, in theory, give teachers more control to discipline their students. But the teachers here, they want a more systemic reform. They want the government to look at this Child Welfare Act here, which they say parents are exploiting in order to get rid of teachers they don't like. This is the act which says that teachers who are accused of child abuse can be removed from their post. But this taps into a much deeper societal issue here. South Korea is a hyper-competitive society, and so much here hinges on academic success. So the parents here feel this enormous pressure that their children have to do well at school. And that pressure, of course, filters down to the children, and clearly we're learning to the teachers as well. And so there are many here who say that this isn't just about fixing this problem in classrooms, that people really here, the government and the policymakers, should be looking at reforming Korea's entire approach to education.
Jean McKenzie in.
I'm gonna stop video here. So obviously there are a lot more deeper issue that's going on here, but this happened this July. And our program, when we're piloting our social emotional learning program, it actually happened before this incident. So I won't go in depth to debrief. I can talk about hours about this topic, but pertaining to SEL, I just wanted to give you a brief background of how South Korea made a rapid growth of economic from 1960 to 2020. This is a graph that I got from the World Bank. And because of rapid growth of economy, there has been lots of changes in the parenting practice, the number of child in a household. And although there was a rapid growth of economy, the system and infrastructure, it is really slowly catching up with that speed. And until 2011, schools were actually allowed to do corporal punishment. So I still remember when I went to school in elementary school in Korea, I remember teachers carrying around like the sticks. And I often got hit when I don't complete assignments, or if there were students who were behaving. But in 2011, they're not allowed to use that kind of punishment anymore at school, which is aligning with some of the practices that you can find in the developed countries. Well, with that good intention, as the reporter said, there are high pressure in terms of competitive academic success. And a lot of times, students in Korea, they go to after-school program, which is called hagwons, which provide like high quality education so that they can learn for the test. So, with those changes in policy, there wasn't any infrastructure or system in place to really manage the behavior of the students. And I think this is where the SEL comes in handy, which will really provide universal education that will be beneficial to really foster those SEL competencies in students as well as teachers and adults. So I'm just going to briefly go over, I'm not going to go over everything, but according to the UNICEF Office of Research Innocent Report Card, South Korean students' overall well-being, because they're really focusing on academic, they are 11th in skills among 38 countries, and then 13th in physical. However, they ranked really low, which is at 34th when we're considering mental health. And there are about 220,000 children in depression, which makes Korea as one of the highest ranking country with a lot of youth suicidal rates. And of course, the COVID impact, I'm pretty sure that it is common across our country, but COVID really impacted on Korean students' mental health well-being as well. So is SDL something new? We all know that historically, educators have been really focusing on teaching students to become a good human being. So in addition to the academics, we all know that students really need to learn those skills to be successful in their life. So there has been several policies that's been implemented that is not exactly called social and emotional learning, but other terms such as character education, moral education, and so on. But there are some of plans that has some components of SL competencies, but some of that there are some limitations as well, such as like the second character education plan. It does not include any teaching of like emotional management or emotional awareness skills. The second one, the mental health improvement policy, it's basically connecting students with the outside counseling providers that's outside of school setting, so that students with more severe mental health needs can receive direct counseling services. And as you know, it's more of responsive practice rather than focusing on those preventative ways to support students. And then the emotional coaching plan, it discontinued in 2014 because of lack of practicality. And then there are like the restorative justice practice. Again, it was limited to students who are engaged in bullying. So the demographic population that's reaching is really limited. And also it does not teach specific SEL skills. So as you can see, there has been some practices. And in year 2021, I believe that Korean government tried to implement within the education like regulation that the schools should teach some of the SEL competencies, but in practice, currently there aren't any like common programs or interventions that is widely practiced in the public school, public education setting. However, individual school teachers, they can look for like effective intervention or programs that they're interested in. And if they are really courage enough to set a time, aside from the academic instruction time to really teach these like SEL competencies, then there are those individual teachers who are practicing in that way. Okay, so I'm gonna skip this one because I feel like we all know that SEL, there has been high trend in the worldwide in supporting SEL. All right, so with those background information about South Korea, I wanted to introduce you to the SEL program that we developed, which is called Emotion Coding. And this is actually how it looks like on the outside cover of the activity book. So first of all, who you are. I'm a doctoral student in University of Massachusetts Amherst, as well as I think there's someone whose microphone is on, but we're also a private company. And there is a reason why, I was involved in that private company because of the specific context of Korea, which I'll talk more about later. But I actually wanted to share with you how it looks like. Oops. Okay, I think I lost it. That's all right. So basically, our team consists of different experts in content and curriculum development, SEL, children's literature, English readiness programs, and art therapy. And we are affiliated with Therapy Center, as well as we get some advices from former director of UNESCO, UNEVAC International Center for Tibet. So this pilot study was conducted in summer this year across 3 days. So each day it consisted of 2 sessions with 45 minutes per session. There were 18 first grade students in the Korean public elementary school, and the implementer was a retired elementary school teacher in the local region. And I also co-facilitated these sessions with her. So I wanted to describe the process. I feel like this process will be beneficial for those people who are trying to, initiate some kind of similar like SEL programs in their own country. So initially, we were asked to pilot the program with 10 students in the after-school program in Seongnam City Youth Training Center. Upon the request from the principal and counselor and many issues among students in the first grade classroom, it was decided to actually implement the program in the real classroom setting, not at the Seongnam City Youth Training Center. So we collaborated with the Seongnam City Youth Foundation as well as local government people to discuss and select a school site that we can try to pilot this SEL program. So after that decision was made, we developed a SEL program for the first grade students in Seongnam City. And since this was a pilot program, our intention was to test the idea of how it would be work, expanding this program for the next academic year, and then slowly expanding it to like larger school population. So after we developed the program, we trained the teacher, staffs, and Ministry of Education personnel to validate our program. We received some of the feedback, incorporated, revised it, and finally piloted at the school. We conducted assessments before and after the workshop by self-report of the students. Also, Ministry of Education staffs came to monitor and see our program during those 3 days of pilot. After the pilot was over, we made some modification of the program, taking in the feedback and experience. And then finally, people really liked our program. So it was decided that we will actually implement it next year with larger population of students. That's 1,500 students across 50 classrooms. So I'm going to briefly describe about what our program is. So our program, our principle is based on the cognitive behavioral therapy and also effective pedagogy using multiple model of teaching, and then also based on Bandura's social learning theory. And here are some program components. So we, begin by checking the moods of the students, and they also get to do some of the artworks in the beginning to really activate their background information. And I believe this was to we asked them to draw a face expression of this duckling who is going to school for the first time. We also integrated the instruction, which explains the conceptual knowledge about each unit's objectives. For example, the anger, emotion, or the worries, the anxiety. Also, there are some of the interactive activity component that consists with worksheets and playing games. And we always ended with the conversation practice, because we know that knowing and actually being able to doing things, those two are different things. So we really wanted to give them a space where they can really do a role play, and also teacher will model and they could repeat after the teacher, of actually practicing the actual script of what they might say in a specific problematic situation. And because this was a 2 session in 1 day, there was a break in between. So we would ask them to really engage in mindfulness practice when they're coming back from break, so that they can refocus and really concentrate and engage in those second part of the session. And because this was again just pilot, we wanted to test the idea. We had to select only a few of the SEL competencies. We weren't able to cover all domains. And just a few examples of what it looked like in the classroom. So what I wanted to actually say here was that I was really amazed by how students really made changes on the first day. They would just, share that, oh, this definitely feels happy, or this definitely feels sad, with really limited number of emotional vocabularies. But at the end of the third day, they were able to elaborate more on using more different levels of emotional vocabularies, as well as provide any reasoning tying in how those emotions and situations are connected together. Another example of how we asked them to draw a picture of their worry monster, and also trying to think of what are some of the things that you think about when you go to the dental office, and we played some of those drilling sounds. So we try to engage in very interactive activities. Okay. So for the remaining, I think I only have a few minutes left. So we conducted assessments. So this was an area where we had challenges. So we reviewed the CAPSUL's compendium of preschool through elementary school SEL and assessment measure, and tried to select the age appropriate and whether students can self-rate, and also if there were any Korean versions available. So we were able to select few of the assessments that were feasible and that met the needs of our students in our context. So the number of items consisted of 15 items. That includes the facial expression, social behavioral situation analysis, also asking some question about their self-esteem and school climate. And because this was a 3-day workshop, of course, their behavior will not change significantly. So we wanted to check their SEL knowledge. And this is a result. So before the workshop, you can see that there were 3 students who were at significant risk, 2 students at risk, and 12 students at average range. But after the workshop, it reduced to 6% in the significant risk range, while there were about 82% of students in average range and then 12% of students at risk. Given that limited number of sample size, I know there is a limitation, but if you see the percentages, it really aligns with the multi-tier system support, where we really want those 80 to 90% of students to be at average, and 5 to 15% to be at risk, and 1 to 5% to be significant risk range. So we did see positive light in terms of how this program could be beneficial to students. Okay, so to share with some of the challenges, I think teacher training was one. We were lucky to have really, really good quality teacher. But thinking about expansion next year, we really want to recruit good quality teacher and really think about what do we want to train teachers in. Some of the things that we were able to do during pilot was teaching or training the teacher on the program itself. But as we saw how she ran the classroom, you know that those teaching practices, like classroom management skills, those are all interrelated with how it will impact the SEL program delivery. So those are some of the things that we are considering for the next round of teacher training. Also the assessment and how to use the data. So remember that this happened before the suicidal incident in summer. So initially the Ministry of Education staff, they were really interested in our program because of the idea of assessment. However, after we got the result, they were, I would say, I don't know if it's the right term, but they were really afraid to share this information with families because there aren't any systems in place to address, like, how do we cope with, what kind of services do we provide to the students that are at risk. So that felt that they're not ready yet to really disseminate this information. So we are currently thinking about like modifying some of the assessment so that it strictly kind of assesses their knowledge and performances, but not really tied to their like mental health like status, which will be sharing the information that school personnel, school people are not ready to like support like relevant services too. So I thought those are really interesting topic that came up. Okay, I think I'm out of time. So here are some of the
We still have 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes? Okay. All right. Yeah. So just thinking about where Korea is at currently, again, we are really, really at the initial phase of trying to initiate this SEL and implement the system. So where do we begin? I know in the CASEL Guide to School Site SEL, they have a section called Build Foundational Support. But that happens once, you have everyone, you already like formed the team. But when you don't even have those team yet, like where do you begin with? Who should you be, involved in with? Who is the person that you need to work with? Who is the the change maker who can really change the system? So in terms of Korean context, there are a lot of, as I shared, like the private institutions, and there are both pros and cons to how like private companies could be efficient in terms of making these small changes, because we know that like governmental policy changes could take a long time. So since we wanted to really test this idea, I feel like really entering this field with like a private company background was actually beneficial to gain some of the buy-ins from the Ministry of Education people, as well as really validate that the need of the SEL program, as well as its positive impact on students' outcome. Also, when developing the SEL curriculum, also thinking about what is the student's need, what is your country's context, and what is already in place. It might not be something that you need to create, like completely something new. Historically, social and emotional competencies has been taught. So I think it is important trying to identify what are some of the aligning practices that has been practiced, as well as what are the gaps of what are you trying to implement now. And implementing SEL, I think I touched base on that. Like, what do you really need in terms of training teachers and implementation dimensions, such as like the frequency, dosage, the adaptability, quality, like student responsiveness, and etc., to really successfully implement your program in school setting. Again, the last piece is about monitoring and feedback. How are you going to assess your students? How are you going to assess your program? And what is the purpose of evaluation? And how are you going to use that data? And those were some of implications that I wanted to share with you based on our experience as well as some of the challenges that we face. Okay, thank you. So I wanted to end my presentation here. Thank you so much. I think you're muted.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Park. That was a very rich presentation about the case study. So before we move on to our next recorded presentation, we have received a few questions that we would like to ask before again we move on to the next presentation. So from both Dr. Awad and Dr. Park, we're talking about this holistic development of cell learning and how today we recognize that education is not just about academic learning, but it's more importantly about how to foster a well-rounded individual. And we know that social emotional learning does address all these aspects that are really crucial for overall growth development for our students, not only for students, but also for adults as well. There is a very growing acknowledgement about mental health awareness across the world. Some conversations that were taboo in some countries are no longer the same because of this awareness around mental health. And overall, the role we have as some of us educators, researchers, school counselors, or experts in the field is to make sure that we're enhancing that learning environment for our students in a emotionally supportive environment. Now, both of you brought really important information about social emotional learning and life skills, and very much interested to know about the importance of social emotional learning in different contexts. We're talking about an Arab Islamic context, and we're talking about South Korea, and it seems that even though these are two different contexts, but the commonality between these two contexts is the importance of integrating cell education in both environments. The need to change our societies has become more poignant at this point. We want to have this diverse interconnection. We want to recognize that there is a growing importance of cell education, but how can we do that? So I do have a few questions that were sent directly to me that I would like to start with Dr. Awad, and then once we're done with those questions, I'll move on to Dr. Park's questions. So Dr. Awad, we have a few questions for you. The first question: to create a holistic learning environment, what role do Arab Islamic resources play in shaping the pedagogical model to reinforce the cell approach?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really excellent question to think about what kinds of pedagogical tools we can derive from within the Arab Islamic tradition. And there's a few elements that I'll describe. The first is that in the history of Arab Islamic knowledge production, there's always been a central focus on relationships. What we know of now as knowledge in university systems is often abstracted and quantified and rendered through curricula that have become substitutable between different contexts and different geographies. Therefore, the contemporary role of the teacher, be it in schools themselves or in universities, is to deal with an existing material and share it with the student. So the teacher becomes a mediator between knowledge that already exists and in some respects has been consolidated, and a student who seeks that knowledge towards some kind of instrumental end. What's unique about Arab Islamic history is that the transmission of knowledge was often deeply personal. It was grounded in relationships between teachers and students. And that relationship is one that's cultivated over time, sometimes over an entire lifetime. So the centrality of relationships is one of the most important pedagogical tools that we have from Arab Islamic history. The fact that when you learn, you are not only taking a set of information, you're also developing and cultivating a relationship. And that there's something deeply human about how we learn and the kind of knowledge we access, regardless of the content. So if we're only accessing knowledge through the impersonal modes of acquisition that exist in contemporary academia, or indeed in contemporary schools, then we're missing out on a primarily human experience of developing a relationship with the teacher and having that relationship be the central ground for learning. And when you have a relationship of this sort, you're talking about the social dimensions of the relationship. You're talking about the emotional support and the modes of transference that exist in that relationship. So these are deeply humane and really powerful inheritances that we have from the Arab Islamic history. I'll briefly call upon the words of a friend, the great Palestinian Christian educator Munir Fashin, who says that behind any true educational experience is friendship. And I think that's a really powerful litmus test to understand how we engage with education. Is friendship the base of how we learn, or is it an impersonal experience? So that's one example. There's many more that we can talk about. And what we do at the Institute is try to enact and implement these ideas. But we also have a research program that talks about Arab Islamic virtue ethics and how virtue ethics from this tradition are powerful pedagogical tools for learning, especially in public schools.
Great, thank you so much. I do see there's a lot of passion when you talked about integrating this relational friendship aspect. My fear is that there is a lot of societal pressures even on educators, and sometimes creating that heavenly environment for educators as well before we implement it and we integrate it to create that relation between teachers, educators, and students is problematic and becomes more of a relationship that needs a lot of support from that upper level management. So yes, it's great to create that friendship, that relationship. How can we support educators to be able to have the motivation, to have that passion, to be able to create that relationship in a world where we know pressures from society, pressures from parents, pressures from the expectations, pressure from just the society at a whole. So you can just elaborate on that quickly before I move on to the next question, please.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. It's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge, just given the number of students that we have in schools and the ratios between teachers and students, and the enormous pressures on teachers to perform, to achieve just the basic measurement criteria of their students graduating with good enough grades to go on to seek either university training or jobs. So there's an enormous amount of pressure, and the kind of weight that teachers hold, especially if they're teachers who are getting paid minimum wage in places like Jordan. They don't have the same kind of support. We no longer have the same kind of appreciation or dignity that was formerly afforded to the teachers who were able to extend that kind of emotional support to develop these friendships. So these are all important challenges to name and to think creatively around. And I think that's why we need new kinds of institutions. We need to really reconfigure the public school system. And importantly, I think we need teacher training programs that foreground, firstly, the importance of the teacher, that bring back the dignity that has always been part of the teacher's persona, that has always been part of how society treats teachers, which is often missing in today's world, in which everything is about kind of the instrumental gain and the criteria of accomplishment that often administrators enforce without really reflecting on what that means. So I think teacher training programs offer that kind of possibility by bringing back the dignity of the teacher position, by supporting the teacher first. I think you're absolutely right. If the teacher hasn't experienced or undergone a transformative experience that has shown her or him how that act of friendship might develop, then it's very easy for it to become another bureaucratic marker, another way in which the administration tries to control what teachers do and how they do them. I do believe, however, and this is maybe a humanistic assumption that I make, is that if you give teachers that space, that support, that dignity at an emotional and social level as teachers before they enter the classroom, then you also empower them to access all sorts of energies and powers that might be dormant within them. And so I think there's a possibility for teacher training, for bringing back dignity to teachers, that unleashes their enormous energy, their enormous powers in the classroom, even if they are overwhelmed with the number of students. And the Institute actually has a project called Istijara, which develops a new pedagogical model for teaching civic studies in Jordanian school curriculum. And what's primary about this curriculum that we've developed isn't necessarily the curriculum itself, but it's rather how we train teachers to implement it. And what we do is we spend 2 or 3 months with teachers before the beginning of the school year to have them really undergo a transformative experience on the basis of their social and emotional capacities to be transformed first as human beings and then to unleash that power in their classrooms.
Great, thanks for elaborating on that. We have another question. Which Arabic or Islamic sources from which disciplines would you suggest focusing on in developing an approach to social and emotional learning in formal and non-formal educational framework?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And what I'd like to do at the outset is maybe share resources from our own work at the Institute, but also through the Istijara program that I just mentioned, because we've created an entire curriculum on the basis of virtue ethics at large, but virtue ethics as it speaks to the importance of social and emotional learning and to the learning environment itself. So I'll be happy to share a link that includes all these resources that we've developed. Perhaps I'll share it with you, Sada, and maybe we could then share it with anyone in attendance. So that's kind of my, that'll be the more comprehensive response. But I may offer now a simple response, which is to say that there are so many resources that are known in Arab Islamic history that deal with pedagogy and virtue ethics and the holistic nature of learning. One of the primary resources in this regard is Al-Ghazali's work. So Al-Ghazali has published not only incredibly sophisticated philosophical and theological treatises on what it means to be a human being and what it means to exist in a society, but he's also written a number of letters. And some of these letters are dedicated towards students or towards seeking knowledge. And these letters often contain rich resources for thinking about what it means to develop a curriculum or a pedagogy that engages on the basis of Al-Ghazali's Islamic worldview. And so we take elements of Al-Ghazali's work as well as elements of his letters as actual parts of the curriculum, but also as inspiration for thinking about what pedagogical tools we can cultivate from within this tradition. Having said that, so Al-Ghazali represents, the more explicit or known elements of Arab Islamic history. Having said that, there are so many other resources that are understudied or unknown when it comes to thinking about pedagogy in the modern context. And so what we do is we also try to excavate this history. We try to look for lesser known texts that may not explicitly speak to pedagogy as we know it today, but whose close attention, if we pay close attention to these kinds of texts, to the kind of practices they presume, we can enact excavation, right? We can develop tools out of texts that don't necessarily make the argument explicitly. And so this is also a call for us to return to our respective traditions, be they in the Arab Islamic world, in the Far East, in South America, anywhere in the world, to think about resources that may not explicitly be making the argument this is a pedagogical tool, but which nevertheless can be excavated on this basis.
Thank you. Dr. Abdullah, one last question, please. This is from Mohammed Al-Husseini. Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Key, for your presentations. According to your experience, Mr. Abdullah, do you think that developing such methods could be more effective and also challenging compared to modern methods of learning?
Yeah, so it's definitely a challenge. It's definitely a challenge in terms of how we go about implementing these kinds of pedagogies and curricula, given how entrenched modern institutions are in existing structures. And so our attempts to change the curriculum in Jordanian public schools is met with a lot of resistance, because it's easier for an administrator or for a government official to reproduce what already exists. In sociology, we know that bureaucracies often function in order to function, not in order to engage their stated aim in a fluid and dynamic way. And so one of the biggest challenges is, how do you make government officials, how do you make ministries responsible for educational change? How do you engage with private and public school systems and have them understand and appreciate the kinds of approaches that we're describing? And that involves its own set of strategies. And maybe that's an entirely separate talk, but I'll mention briefly that to the extent possible, to develop, again, friendships or relationships with these administrators, to develop working relationships with government officials that engage in curriculum reform. And having that relationship be there allows those bureaucrats to feel like they're stakeholders. It allows them to feel like they co-own or they co-author the program. So rather than saying, we have created the curriculum, this is how it should be, we demand that it be instated, how can we begin the process of having a working relationship with these people in charge, with these bureaucrats, so that they feel as compelled by the project at a personal level as we feel. So those are the biggest challenges we face. But I think it's less of a challenge to actually develop the curriculum, because unlike STEM research, unlike advancements in robotics or stem cell therapy, you don't need $1 million lab. You don't need giant equipment. All you need is a good library or access to a library, and that allows you to begin developing and rethinking and excavating, as I've mentioned, these resources available. So I think if we shift our perception of what's possible, we already have the tools to create these differences, and then the challenge becomes how we implement them in relationship to existing bureaucracies.
Thank you so much. I'll open the floor. If you have any questions for Dr. Abdullah, please ask away before we move on to Dr. Park. Do we have any questions for Dr. Abdullah? Well, I'll move to Dr. We have a few other questions for Dr. Park, and please feel free to send me yours directly, or feel free to just ask away. Dr. Park, thank you for your presentation. It's, as I said earlier, it's interesting to see a lot of common features, even though we're talking about a Korean model versus some other case studies that have been done in North Africa, for example. There is something that was very interesting to me, was this disconnect between the expectations. I remember when I was an educator in a small school in my home country, Morocco, I always asked the students, what are your expectations? What do you want to learn when you this year? And then I list their answers on a sheet. And then when I meet the parents, I ask the same question: what would you like your kid to learn this year? And the disconnect between what the parents want their kids to achieve versus what the kids want to learn or want to achieve that year is phenomenal. And so this disconnect between parents who are always looking for children to do well at school, to be smart, to do good in STEM-related subjects, and regardless whether they are socially, emotionally supported, but as long as they're doing great academically speaking, then that overburn is excluded. So looking at your presentation, your case study, will you be looking at generalizing or looking at that similar case implemented in different contexts?
Yes. So there are different projects that we are working on, and this is one of them, which is we're trying to target like the public education setting. But just to speak more about Korean context, I don't know if you're familiar with K-pop, like K-dramas. It's very trendy in the society, and it depends on technology so much. So as an educator, I really think that education, we really need to, take time, and like money should not drive like education, I really believe that we really need to be grounded in philosophy, but just to really enter like or just to gain those buy-in in the Korean population, we just have to get those buy-in from parents. So another that project that we are working on is really developing a program or a curriculum that students or the children can like easily complete each day, so that they build those like muscles, like SEL muscles, and then parents can really like engage in facilitating those like relational conversation, and it really give opportunity for their children to really practice the skills that they learn. So let me actually share this with you. I know it's in Korean, but it's like our website, which is like a parent version of our program. And basically, we have an app where they can, do a engage in brief assessment using some of the drawings. They can easily like do it on the app, and then we produce some of the like assessment results that's tied to like suggesting. Actually, we're tailoring like curriculum based on the assessment results, so that students can read, like do some of the activities, and it also includes some of like the English, like literature, and then also like how do you communicate with parents. So a lot of those like conversational piece as well. So yes, I do hear that there are lots of disconnect between the expectation between parents. So we are trying just different things, tackling an area where we can impact like the public education setting, as well as the like the individual household. And I think that is one of the merit of being a private company, that we can easily, be flexible in terms of thinking about different ways to impact our society in different parts.
Okay, so I'm gonna open the floor. I know I have a few questions that folks want to ask directly, and then I will follow up with some other questions once we're done with Dr. Benovat.
Thanks, Sarah. My name's Aaron Benavot. I'm also one of the conveners with NISM, and we're very delighted to have all the participants in the conference. Dr. Park, from my experiences in South Korea, I've been there a few times, but I recall how the Korean government tried some years ago to develop a program around happy schools, and there was a whole curriculum around happy schools. And so some of the issues that you mentioned in the presentation around, the prevalence of bullying and children who suffer, the effects of this bullying have been, I think, on the minds of a lot of policymakers in South Korea for quite a long time. So I wonder maybe if you could characterize which aspects of these previous policy interventions have been, let's say, less successful or less effective, and why you think that the intervention that you're proposing is likely to be more effective than those interventions that have taken place in the past. And just as a follow-up, it's clear from the way that you presented the material that you see social media as playing a very outsized role in some of the phenomena that young people are experiencing in the Korean education system. And are there particular steps that you would suggest in order to limit the impact of social media in the South Korean context?
I think you brought up a really good question. So I think you're on point. We share similar challenges as what previous government has been trying. I think, but this is again like the pilot that we are currently trying to tackle and test whether we can really successfully implement it. And some of the challenges that I shared is it's really related with the resources, who is going to deliver it, and do we have time for it? Because school is already fully packed with like academic instruction, and because it's really highly like academic focused, that most likely will get pushback from parents if we say we're gonna require students to take a class in SEL. But what I see as a difference between previous trials versus now is that like this big incidents that happened in summer, again, Korea is very sensitive to media and it's very trendy. And these kind of like social incidents really impacts how like the policymakers really, pushes them to facilitate this in a way that's like faster. And I think that is one of the big difference. And also compared to before, we do see a lot of changes in media. People are more aware of mental health well-being. There are new celebrities who is a mental health provider. She comes in like every show now. And she and everyone is now really familiar with like mental health. And I think it is timely that we can introduce social emotional learning in Korean society. Compared to before, we know that there has been like bullying, like history of bullying and those kind of problems. But if we shift that to SEL as being more preventative, like universal program, where every student can benefit, not just those students who is bullying or those like few students who are making those problems, but it is actually skill that would be beneficial for everyone. So I think that makes it, makes our program, not because our program is better, but I think it's just timely and everyone recognizes the need. I think that is the biggest difference. In terms of your second question, I do wish I know the answers to your question, but I think again, because of this incident summer, it really like raised like where like the Korean education system is now. I know in the United States there are like emergency protocols in terms of how do we like restrict social media when there is this crisis. I think it is really time for Korea to think about what are some of the crisis emergency plan that we can develop given some of the consequences that happened in summer. I did see that there were a lot of like spillover of social media, which I think wasn't, impacting students in a good way. So, yeah, I think I could only say that, but I'm sorry, I'm not giving you a full, answer to how we can actually restrict social media. But since I think we can try to look for what are the ways that we can, utilize social media in a positive way, because it is so prevalent in Korean society rather than like restricted, trying to change that perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Park. Thank you, Dr. Benavat. And as Dr. Park said, we do wish we have a solution or an answer how to restrict social media and its impact. Dr. Park, one last question. This is again from Mr. Al-Husseini. Thank you very much for your presentation. And the question is, Dr. Key, South Korea is also known by education pressure that could turn to burnout. What are the solutions that our government is supposed to apply in order to limit the risks of such pressure?
It is also ongoing debate, and there are so many conversation and like policy, like changes in policies, and I think our government now they're trying to like change the college entrance system, but again, once like those like government changes like every those years, it's just like inconsistent those practices. So one of the biggest reason is the college entrance system, where students only get one chance in a year to take the college entrance exam, and then that really determines where you will end up in college. So that puts a lot of pressure in students. There has been many changes in terms of how we can incorporate some of those like the personal aspects through either like recommendation, but again those like testing score is like the primary like it takes a lot of percentage in terms of determining your college enrollment. So, and of course also there are a lot of like layers to this. So I think if we can't really change that problem that has been like ongoing for years, I think social emotional learning is really important again, because it gives power for students, like those competent skills for them to navigate their stressful like emotions, and how they can really set goals without comparing with others. You can really acknowledge your own strength and think about your own ways to be successful in society. So that's where I think the social emotional learning could be really beneficial for students in Korea.
Thank you, Dr. Park. We were wishing for more of a reassurance, but now you just mentioned another aspect of pressure, the government, and the disconnect again with what the government imposes one test, and that test is decisive whether they get into school or not. And then we're asking for our students, whether through social emotional learning or through education in general, not to yield to these pressures. And our governments are imposing pressures from all different aspects. So there is a huge, as we mentioned earlier, there's the need for cell learning, social emotional learning is very important. There is a huge raising awareness about social emotional learning importance, and mental health awareness. But I think the problem is deeply rooted in the way our government functions, in the way the structure of our educational systems are. And so the root cause of this problem needs to be looked at from the problem in itself. And so as educators, we're all trying to come up with all these case studies, with all these studies in place in order to show the importance of social emotional learning. And we can do much, but if we don't have the buy-in and we don't have the support of the government policies that are enacted and implemented, then chances are going to look at those policies as not supportive of what educators are doing on the ground. So it's, as educators, we can be hopeful. I think the future is bright. We just need to work on it. I know Mr. Soufiane raised his hand. Please go ahead. Just go ahead and unmute your mic. If you can raise your voice a little bit, please, so we can hear you. Maybe a little bit more. can hear you. Yep.
Okay, so we use this. Maybe it's better.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for hosting. Thank you for both doctor and thank you, Dr. Hee-young, for your words about the Moroccan earthquake. Thank you so much. Also about the first video we have seen, I want to tell you that in Morocco now also teachers are protesting, so not it's not an easy work all around the world. About your presentation, I want just to ask you two questions, if you may please. Give me more explanation about what does it mean exactly a student with significant risk, less risk. I didn't get well maybe the pre and the post test because I didn't understand maybe how you can know an elementary student if he has a risk or not. I didn't maybe get the clear image of, about what you want to see, to say. And finally, can you please share with us the material or the textbooks or any links where we can find it? Because as Sarah said before, I do have an idea to maybe implement and did same experiment here in Morocco with the students. It will be great because I'm really interested, and the 2 or 3 images I've seen in the textbooks looks like very great work you did. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you're talking about the assessment. So the assessment, we did a knowledge-based assessment because within 3 days it's impossible to see changes in like students' behavior, right? So I can briefly show you how our assessment tool looks like. Let's see. So I'm just gonna show you like briefly. So this is like a facial expression assessment where students see this picture. You can see that how we took a picture of Korean students, and this was already available in the Korean version. And they had to like circle whether it's like the sad face, angry face, or happy face, or scary face. So this was one of like those like the facial expression items. Also, the second one was like a situational where we like share like a scenario based, like challenging scenarios, and student had to guess one of the characters' emotions. Another one is the behavioral. So after looking at this, you have to guess like one of these characters' feelings, as well as what are the like the positive behavior or appropriate behavior that he needs to do like afterwards. So this is also already psychometrically proven with like a valid like a research-based assessment, and we just adapted with like a Korean language. So those are just few examples. And then last, we asked about, do you feel like you're now more competent or confident about, do you feel like you are confident to control your anger? Like 1 being, I don't know, 2 being, yes, I know for sure. So those are related with self-esteem. And then also like asking about how much they enjoy like making friends, those kind of items. So with all this, we added up the numbers, and then those at-risk significant scores, we decided some of the cutoff scores. So that's why some of the students landed in at-risk versus like significant and then an average. Like, I hope that makes sense. And then the second one was if we could share the resource with you, right? Yeah, if you could like give me your email address, I think I can like communicate with you by email. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Park. We do have a comment. People displaced in national systems still need support through social emotional learning. Then another comment, indeed, the future is bright. Educationalists are beginning to appreciate social emotional competencies and integrating them in educational programs. Great. So I think we've mentioned the government and we wish if somebody from the government can talk to us about is there reinforcement of self in enacted policies around educational systems. We were not able to have our next speaker in person, but he made sure to record a presentation for us, and he's a former Minister of Education in Finland. Dr. Naji, would you please share the presentation for our last speaker?
My name is Olli-Pekka Heinonen, and I'm the Director General at the International Baccalaureate. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to talk on a topic of enabling students to grow into well-being. Well-being has been a theme that has really come into the school and education discourse during the last couple of years. Of course, the pandemic has had a strong impact on that, but not only the pandemic, also otherwise the question of well-being has become more and more important, as we have understood that if there is no well-being on the student side and the teacher side, there will be no learning, because there will be things that will be burdening the mind, and that does not allow the learning to happen. And therefore, I think this is a very valuable topic. I would like to start by telling why the title of well-being for students is so important. We have seen during the pandemic that the experience of well-being among students has deteriorated significantly. And also we've seen that after the pandemic, the challenges of well-being have remained on a higher level among young people than in the adult generations. We know that the questions like climate change, loss of biodiversity are something that worry the students a lot. According to some surveys, the majority of 10 to 12-year-old students are having climate anxiety. And we also know that the young generations are saying that they are feeling less in control of their lives than at any point in recent history. We also heard from students and young people from 15 to 26 that 75% of them say that future is a scary place for them. And too many of them also believe that the world will come to an end during their lifetime. Those are very severe questions concerning the the well-being of young people. And this kind of surveys and research results just keep coming and coming. If we look at the OECD statistics, we see the same development. And when we are looking at the clinical level mental health difficulties worldwide, we are talking about 10 to 20% of children and adolescents experiencing them. And also the World Health Organization states that mental health counts for 16% of the global burden of disease for young people aged 10 to 19. And unfortunately, young people's suicide is the fourth leading cause of death among them. So I think that we do not need any more proof for the fact that this is something that all of us who are dealing, working, and helping young people need to take this phenomena seriously. Still, when we are looking at different evidence and different research, the research field is very muddied in definition and evidence. And here we see some work by Harvard, where they have tried to link up different taxonomies to make sense of the field. And as you can see, there is plenty of different kind of terminology, different definitions, which are kind of relative to each other, but there isn't kind of any united kind of narrative for us to take the next steps. For the IB, our starting point is that the IB programs are looking for a transformational education, which means that we want to enable the growth of the student in a holistic manner, so that we are not only concentrating, for example, on the academic development, but as well on moral, the social, the physical, the cultural, kind of intellectual.
My name is Olli-Pekka Heinonen, and I'm the general at the International Baccalaureate.
That requires
Thank you for giving me the chance to talk on a topic of enabling to grow into well-being. Well-being has been a theme that has really come into school education discourse during the last couple of years. Of course, the pandemic has had a strong impact on that, but not only the pandemic, also otherwise the question of well-being has become more and more important, as we have understood that if there is no well-being on the student side and the teacher side, will be things that will be burdening the mind, and that does not allow the learning to happen. And therefore, I think this is a very valuable topic. I would like to start by telling why the title of well-being for students is so important. We have seen during the pandemic that the experience of well-being among students has deteriorated significantly. And also we've seen that
It's a
after the
physical
pandemic,
school, home
the
environment,
challenges of
but
well-being
definitely
have
also
remained
online,
on a
the
higher
digital
level
environment, and how
among
healthy
young people
that
than
environment is.
in the adult
And then
generations.
a fourth element, which we
We know
sometimes forget,
that the
and that is
questions
the
like
that is the
climate
question
change,
that
loss of
what is our
biodiversity
view of
are
ourselves?
something that worry
How do the young
the
people
students a lot.
evaluate themselves?
According
and
some
trust
surveys, the majority of
themselves?
10 to 12-year-old students
And
are
also the
having
question
climate
that
anxiety.
how good young
And
people
we
are
also
from
know
challenge,
that
because that
the
is
young
what
generations
school is
are
about.
saying that
That is
they are
what life
feeling
will
less
be
in
about.
control of
When
their
faced with
lives
challenges,
than at any point in
are they
recent history.
seen as possibilities and opportunities
We also heard
to learn new
from
things,
students
to overcome
and young
challenges,
people from
or
15 to
are they
26
threatening? Are they something
that
to be avoided?
75%
And
of
that
them
kind of
say
skills can be developed
that future is a
same way
scary place for them.
as physical muscles can
And
be developed.
too many of them
And
also
that's the
believe
huge
that
challenge
the world will come to
for
an end
every teacher
during their
to
lifetime.
be able to set
Those are
the
very severe
right
questions
type
concerning
of
the well-being
challenges
of
and learning
young
tasks
people.
for each student, so that
And
they
this kind of
are required
surveys
to
and
further
research
grow,
results just
reach
keep
them.
coming and coming. If
But
we
on the
look
other
at the OECD
considering the
statistics,
development
we
phase
see
that
the same development.
he or she
And
that
when we are
he or she
looking
is capable
at the
of reaching,
clinical level mental health
that is
difficulties
really what education
worldwide,
is all
we are
about,
talking about
to help
10 to 20% of children and adolescents experiencing them.
So then we
And
come to the question
also
of how we deal
the
with this
World Health
framework
Organization
and how we're promoting
states
well-being.
that mental health counts for 16% of the global burden of disease for young people aged 10 to 19. And unfortunately, young people's suicide is the fourth leading cause of death among them. So I think that we do not need any more proof for the fact that this is something that all of us who are dealing, working, and helping young people need to take this phenomena seriously. Still, when we're looking at different evidence and different research, the research field is very muddied in definition and evidence. And here we see some work by Harvard, where they have tried to link up different taxonomies to make sense of the field. And as you can see, there is plenty of different kind of terminology, different definitions, which are kind of relative to each other, but there isn't kind of any united kind of narrative for us to take the next steps. For the IB, our starting point is that the IB programs are looking for a transformational education, which means that we want to enable the growth of the student in a holistic manner, so that we are not only concentrating, for example, on the academic development, but as well on the moral, the social, the physical, the cultural, and the kind of intellectual development of that young person. And that requires for us to think also about the well-being question through a very holistic approach. And when looking at that holistic approach, we have been working together with Oxford University. And this is a well-being framework that they have created. And it shows that when we're talking about school life satisfaction and well-being, we need to concentrate on 4 different areas. Of course, there is the health, the kind of basic habits of living a healthy life, which are important. But then it's also the people around and in that school community, whether we are talking about the school teacher, staff, or whether we are talking about peers, or whether we are talking about the different social support that those young people are getting. And then, of course, there's the environment. How healthy is that environment for students? And it's a physical school home environment, but definitely it's also the online, the digital environment, and how healthy that environment is. And then a 4th element, which we sometimes forget, and that is the skills. That is the question that, what is our view of ourselves? How do the young people evaluate themselves and trust themselves? And it's also the question that how good young people are in front of challenges, because that is what school is about, and that is what life will be about. When faced with challenges, are they seen as possibilities and opportunities to learn new things, to overcome challenges, or are they threatening? Are they something to be avoided? And that kind of skills can be developed in the same way as physical muscles can be developed. And that's the huge challenge of every teacher, to be able to set the right type of challenges and learning tasks for each student, so that they require the person to grow to reach them. But on the other hand, considering the development phase of that student, he or she knows that he or she is capable of reaching them. And that is really what education is all about, to help each student to grow into humanity. So then we come to the question that how we are dealing with this framework and how we're promoting well-being in schools around the world. As I said, the kind of research we have and the different methods that different schools are dealing today with well-being show that some of those practices are not based in any research. So, and actually there's also the challenge that we do not have enough evidence that what would be a method or a solution or intervention that would work in different contexts. So a kind of a top-down approach is not the one that we want to take. But we want to take a bottom-up solution to come together with schools, learn with schools, experimenting on different kind of ways of enabling the student well-being and connecting action research to those experiments to be able then to kind of scale that kind of innovations to other schools around the globe. So this is really the bottom-up innovation that we are looking for. We are supporting and creating those experiments and different approaches in different schools, and then try to learn from them, and at the end to offer the whole variety of schools the learnings that we have gained. And here you can see the ways that different schools can get involved in those different initiatives that we are taking. We have brought together some schools that have been doing this work for a longer period of time, who are the kind of pioneers of the student well-being. And we are trying to create a kind of a learning hub in the area of well-being, so that from those learnings and experiences that these advanced schools have gained during the years could be documented and they could be shared with all the schools. And there are, of course, different other types of action that we have taken. There are action research program that we are doing, and there are also kind of a work that we are doing with the Oxford University to find ways to measure well-being in its different aspects. And here you can see that what we're looking for as deliverables from those different innovation projects. And this is something that we're to share with all of you once we are in the phase that we have all the data collection materials ready, we have all the research ready, we have all the documents gathered from different evidence-based interventions and learnings from schools. And we're looking that we would be in that position in a couple of years. So well-being is actually a very good example what a kind of a complex system the education system really is. That, and then understanding how that complex system is functioning, we have to understand the interconnections that there are in order to be able to create the competencies for future resilience. And of course, the competencies should be such that they can be taught and they can be learned. And that is the next step of the work that we are already doing. Here you can see the World Economic Forum kind of competencies in the order of importance of the future of jobs. And as you can see, the kind of social, emotional, communication, collaboration type of competencies have become more and more important in recent years. Here you can see the framework, how we are dealing with the different competencies of the future. And this is just an example what we are doing on certain competencies. But of course, the very, very valuable things here are that what are the effective pedagogies for each of these competencies, how they can be measured and assessed as part of the learning process, and what are the cultural considerations that have to be taken into consideration. And of course, also the question that what is the evidence of development of these competencies over time? So this is the frame how we are creating to be used as a tool for different schools. And here you can see an example on critical thinking, that what does it mean in practice? What kind of things are coming up through the surveys, through the research, and through the learnings from the schools. And similar way of framing we are doing with the other competencies that are central also for the resilience and well-being of students. So all this work enabling the well-being of students is aiming to building a world-class learning system. And this is so important because well-being cannot be isolated from the other aims that schools and education is having. And it cannot be isolated from the wider community around the school. So well-being in that sense is a truly kind of a wicked challenge, that it is so interconnected that you have to make sure that all the different building blocks of a world-class learning system are in place and also are developed in an aligned manner, that only through that we can reach the outcomes of learning, the equity and inclusion of each child, and also reaching the higher well-being levels of the students. So we're really talking about a very holistic approach when we are enabling the well-being of our students, the current ones, and the future generations. Thank you so much for your interest towards this topic of students growing into well-being. There is so much for all of us to learn on that topic. The solutions and the ways of implementing are not perfect yet. So we have to learn together and from one another the best solutions, and also then learn to implement them in a way that is effective to the purpose we're looking after. I wish you all the best in that work.